think we look pretty good. Okay, hello. Hi.
Hi.
Today I'm talking to my dear, wonderful friend Lydia, who I have known as an anti-marriage person. And I was always wondering what is this about, like, and how, and when, and how did this start? Have you always
How
been
did
like
it
this?
start? That's a pretty good question. That one's personal, I imagine, and took therapy to quite figure out. I have a distinctive memory when I was about 8 years old of my grandmother walking out of her house minutes after my grandfather dying. And at this time, they'd probably been married for like 50 some years. And she stood out on her front porch minutes after her husband died and said, "Thank God I'm finally free."
Wow.
Right. So my grandmother was born in 1924. She had 7 children with this man, and she spent 50 plus years with him.
Wow.
And I asked her much later when I was like 15. I was like, "Did you love Grandpa?" And she kind of just like dismissed me and laughed, and she said, "Your grandfather was a good husband, because he never laid a hand on me, and he didn't play around on me." And I remember being 15
That's
and
a
having
lot.
yeah, I had so many ideals. I was like, surely that can't be the like end all be all, but like I had no idea quite what the dating pool looked like, and like actually those two qualifiers still hard in 2020s.
Like it's like minimum, but for us it's like so much, right?
Absolutely. And so the anti-marriage thing, like I think, started probably with the belief at a young age that it maybe wasn't in my best interest, right? That maybe not all women liked it, right? Because at the same time,
They still don't.
I was raised in like the Disney generation. I was born in 1985, so like all of the big time Disney princess things were happening as I was little.
Yes.
In fact, I even had like
So you're
Prince
a
Charming.
millennial.
Yeah, 1985. I am that elder millennial.
Yes, I'm Gen X, so we're different.
All my friends are Gen X, right? And then I realized that I often have to speak to people that are younger than me because they're technically millennials. And my generation is a really poor example of feminism. Generationally, the boomers, we like to talk about like how old the boomers were. Most women were comfortable with talking about how they were feminists or they believed.
Boomers.
Yeah, the boomers.
Very interesting.
Right? And then, of course, your generation also, women,
Gen X for sure.
way more comfortable with describing themselves as feminists, describing themselves as women's rights advocates, right? Then we get to my generation, and after what I believe was Rush Limbaugh coining the term feminazi, we started to see this like huge decline in women who were willing to talk or describe themselves at least as feminists. And so that was hard. It was hard growing up in a generation full of women that wanted to see like kind of a return to the princess ideology versus like our older sisters and our aunts living like this totally 1990s lifestyle that was, fresh out of the cocaine 80s, like, and it was very progressive, but we did this backslide. And now in my generation, fewer than 1 in 20 refer to themselves as feminists.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. And they would largely describe themselves as pro-marriage. Most of the girls that I grew up with are married. Some of them are on their second marriages. I didn't really understand the concept as a religious practice due to its history of oppression against women. Some of the first Christians to take on marriage thought of it actually as a sinful act. Like they had this goodness scale. A saint had established a goodness scale.
Goodness scale.
Right. And you were thought to be less good if you got married. Better if you were widowed. And the best if you were a virgin your whole life. So, Christians weren't the originators of the marriage ceremony, but it largely had to do more with blending tribes, family estate, the passage of lineage of children. And that concept now really speaks to a certain classism. As a lower class individual, like in an economic sense, it would not behoove me to marry. with like different things. Like I wouldn't qualify for the same type of healthcare. I wouldn't qualify for the same type of education support or
Mm-hmm.
help. I recently found out, like, I don't know, 2 years ago when I got my tubes taken out, that if I had been married, I would have had to have my partner sign off on a surgery that I was choosing for my own body.
No.
Yeah. And you have to sign federal authorization for sterilization. It was the
Interesting.
proudest words I had ever, like, signed my name to. I was like, fuck yeah, I am. Rip them bitches out. Because Roe versus Wade had just been turned over.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was a huge concern for me because the idea of limiting women to just reproduction and marriage has been a sense of controlling so many cultures. And depending on how fanatical those rules are around marriage, shows often how fanatical the society
Mm-hmm.
is as well. And those cultures that we would describe as like super pro marriage are often super anti woman. um,
Well, I come from pro-marriage culture historically. Now it's becoming more modernized. Not only pro-marriage, like meaning of woman's life is having a child,
Yeah.
and of course in within a marriage, because outside of marriage it's just
Right, sinful, right?
sinful. Yes.
And what is the
So
religious dominance there?
it's Orthodox Christian.
Got it.
Orthodox
Okay,
Christian.
that makes sense.
Orthodox Christian. So these days it's not the same, but like my mom would be like, she stayed there. I moved here, and my mom would ask me, "Oh, so and so, did they get married? Did they have children?" And I said, "No, they don't want children because I came here to Seattle, and here people are." So free, lots of people, so
Right.
progressive, and they're like, no, we're not interested in children, and for many different reasons. And my mom would be so shocked, like, what? How is this possible? What's the point of life? She could not understand, like,
Right.
conservative culture, old-fashioned culture, older
So,
generation.
so then, what is the point of a woman's life though? Then after like her children grow and move out and her husband dies.
Yes, move out. Oh, what is, it's grandchildren. Grandchildren come over.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Generational support for the family
Because
system.
over there we are all like super close and together, and so like my mom, she was divorced, so she was almost without a man always. And then first it was children and nephews and nieces and sisters and girlfriends, and then after she got older, like grandchildren loved her so much, and everyone coming over to see her, and I don't know, that wasn't watching TV, I don't know, and hanging out with girlfriends. I know it does not sound too glamorous, but
Right.
for an
I mean,
old lady, I don't know. I don't know.
it would be hard to say like what would be better, I suppose, than that. Like I definitely would like to be one of those old biddies that travels everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and just generally raises hell.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how well you do that with having to like pay for children and grandchildren. I don't think that's
Yeah,
possible.
I know, impossible.
I have one kid, and he's 17. He's almost out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And they're expensive traditions to
Mm-hmm.
have.
So you're not pro marriage, but you are pro
Really?
having children and being in a relationship with men or
I
women or anyone.
For sure, I'm super pro-choice, I would say, and I'm pro-abortion. But that time I happened to decide like, no, I'm gonna have this kid. I had my son though with the absolute knowledge that I may end up doing it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh, really?
I did not like ascribe to this idea that where would I be without a man? I started making those plans immediately. Like where would I be? Because in where I'm from, it's pretty common for you to get pregnant and then get married.
And
Like,
get married.
Yeah, because you're pregnant.
Because
Like
you're
that's
pregnant.
that
Not
was
to be alone and not to have hardship of being a
yeah,
single mother.
but I also noticed a lot of women were having hardship in their marriages. Like their husbands wouldn't work, and that was like a big deal. But they also wouldn't take care of the children so that their wives could work.
Mm-hmm.
And there was all this dependence factor that became a part of survival, that became a part of their relationships.
Let me get this straight. So they would get married to the father of their child.
Yeah, who they said was the father of their child, for
Yes,
sure. Yeah.
would get married, but lots of times husbands still would not work and would not help out with children, so this would not improve their lives.
Absolutely not.
Would it improve anything? Would it give any satisfaction, like the status, anything, or nothing?
Maybe. I think it gives women, amongst women, some sort of like, I'm suffering like you're suffering and we're better for our suffering kind of like hee-haw, because I've never gotten like kudos from a bunch of women when I'm like, ha, I don't have to deal with any of that shit, right? But I do notice that married women, for the most part, where I'm from, discuss largely like their children, how things are going with their children, how things are going with their community, their church.
Mm-hmm.
But their marriage, like once they got married, the idea of marriage was no longer really like the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was just part of like an ends to a means. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you get married, you have babies, and you go from there.
Let alone the idea of sex, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how sex gets worked into that, because we all have sex, but none of us want to talk about having sex, but yet we're all pro like babies, even though babies come from sex.
Mm-hmm.
And like the amount of women that I knew that for some reason were like shocked that I chose not to marry, you know, baby daddy.
Mm-hmm.
I actually remember going to coffee with some of my friends and them being like, you can't just like take your baby and leave town.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
Why not?
why? Right?
Yeah.
So I did. I up and moved my 10-month-old and I up to Bellingham and did not marry that man. Would not enter into any sort of dishonesty about like my child or anything like that. And it was hard. Like it was not easy being a single mom.
So were you in love with this man or no?
No. Not in the way that I would have wanted to if I thought about spending the rest of my life with somebody.
Okay.
I had been in love really, really young. And then from that point forward, it was more like, I don't really want to fall in love. But I tend to be on a 10-year cycle. I only do it every 10 years, like 15, 25, 35. So I've got some years before 45 happens. I'm hopeful. And I am pro-relationship. I believe in community. I believe in partnering. No matter really what that means to you. Whether that's in like a friendship or communal sense, or whether that's in an intimate relationship. Partnership is good for humans, and we should know how to work in partnerships. Yeah, absolutely.
There's many levels.
But just like, I would not get into just any contractual agreement on a business for thousands and thousands of dollars on the line with just anyone. I would definitely be scrupulous about that, and I do believe that like the marriage contract in and of itself carries that type of weight. We know it's definitely not like you can't get divorced, it means forever. Like 43% of first time marriages end in divorce. 60% of second time marriages end in divorce. And a whopping 73% on that third time's a charm, apparently not. 73% of third time marriages end in divorce.
Wow.
That's huge. That's huge, right? And you would really want to think that maybe after somebody had already done it that many times, they would like have the secret sauce. Turns out it's still human interaction, and you can't really apply.
Maybe I would think maybe one of the reasons why there are so many more divorces later and later in life, because people are more independent. They have more confidence. They're more financially independent. When we're younger, we used to be tend to be stuck in some kind of situations. It's harder to get out from marriage, whatever, emotionally,
I mean,
financially.
statistics show that gray divorce, which is considered after 50, is incredibly harder on women than it is men, financially and health-wise.
Ooh.
Yeah,
It's harder.
it's harder. It is absolutely harder on women. Same with the percentages of men who leave women due to a woman being ill versus the amount of women who will leave their male partner due to the male's illness. We are definitely the caretakers on this earth.
Of course.
Definitely. But for me, the symbolism of marriage was the buy and sell and trade of my gender for thousands of years. And there was no like Queen Victoria white wedding dress that was gonna change that. You know, like I can't imagine trying to go back and like redo slave ownership contracts to make it a good thing. Like you don't get to take those back. And marriage was a type of slavery. Like it was even written in the Bible. It was comparative to slavery.
Oh, that's info. Just changing your last name. It's you're not yourself, your own being, your own
Mrs. means
ancestor.
the misters.
Yes, anymore. Now you are part of this new family and part of this new name and your identity that you had all these years. You know, in class you were called this last name. Everywhere you went, now you have a totally new identity. I never changed it for that reason. Everyone in my culture would change it, like 99.99%. But I always thought it was weird. I was like, why should I change my last name that I had all my life? So I said, no, thank you, bye.
I mean, it just, for me, it's like really confusing because I am not of the man. Like, it makes sense for your children to take your last name because your children are of you. But it's very, like, Adam's rib bullshit for me to think about taking a man's name. Plus, like, I really hate most other... Like, I like my name.
Well, maybe if, like, both take both names or something for some reason.
Right. And I've heard about such things as men actually legally changing their name to their wives' names.
Yeah, even children. I was like, okay, I'm a woman. I don't want my father's name to disappear. Maybe if I have two children, I want to have my name, one my husband's.
Right. Zero population growth in effect right there. Yeah.
So, yes, next question. So you think that men are capable of all this, what women want? Have you seen examples?
No, I haven't actually.
Did you grow up around this? Do your friends have this going on and that they found
A huge amount of my friends are married. I just wouldn't qualify them as any happier than...
Or boyfriends. I'm just talking in general relationships because I hear like complaints all the time and we see how people have relationships, they break up all the time. It's very hard. Women constantly complain about men and men constantly trash women, women are crazy, blah, 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 drive us nuts. So, like, is this a real thing or are we forcing or what's going on?
I mean, I know that with gender roles being somewhat ambiguous now, that creates confusion on this idea of dominance, but I think you should ask yourself why there needs to be dominance in your relationship, because that's realistically what we're talking about when we talk about, like, who is the man in the relationship. You're talking about who is dominant in that relationship, who makes the decisions, who pays the bills, who does those things. And so, like, that is such a weird concept to try to, like, stick with, that I think we're going to keep seeing unhappiness on everybody's side the longer we try to, like, stick to that, like, old, worn out kind of idealism. I don't know that
So do you go by that pattern usually? Did you have that, like, someone is dominant, someone is not?
I mean...
Because I'm into equality. I'm like, if we're not 50-50 in every way, I don't feel comfortable. That's why I don't go for rich men or for someone younger, older, like we're same, almost the same, and I feel good in this kind of relationship. Comfortable.
I, with pride, say I'm not one of those women that, like, goes after a man for money or uses their resources for survival.
Or do you think that we are called stupid?
Yes. And sometimes I think maybe I'm stupid too, because on average, I would say men cost me, like, $500 a month.
Yes. So
right? Like, I have been this, like, strong, independent woman that didn't want a man to take care of her, so I just ended up with these douchebags that, like, needed a woman to take care of them. And I think that was, like, the backtrap of that. Like, and the thing is, I don't want either. Like, the 50-50 sounds great.
Strong women attract weaker men.
Yes, I do. And I'm also really familiar with, like, them ending up hating you for everything that they initially loved you for. Like, that seems to be a really common...
Really?
Yeah. Now, granted, I haven't really had lengths
How does that switch happen? When? Where?
Because I don't think that...
Or in the end, they just say things like,
Because the idea of something in theory versus practice is always different. Right? And especially with, like, an independent woman. Or because what happens if she doesn't need you? That means that you have to work.
Yes.
And not just like you have to work in your relationship. If need is not established, then both partners have to show up for each other for a reason.
Of
right?
course.
And I think that's super important. I just probably wasn't able to really like establish that in my relationships. But
well, you are growing up,
right? And to be fair, most marriages last 7 years. And I obviously like I haven't spent 7 years with someone other than like first love. Should have been baby daddy, and that was on and off, and we had really chaotic type. I think most of my relationships.
well, you were children.
Yeah, most of my relationships up until this point into my 30s would be like 5-year runs usually.
So this is, you're saying, almost like a natural timeline, natural cycle, 5 to 7 years.
I mean, it was always different in every one of those relationships. There was a lot of relationships I quickly ended because I just knew that there was not a compatibility issue.
Well,
when you leave somebody after being with them for 5 years or more, like, you have usually pretty good reasons.
Of course.
And I would venture to say, at least in my own behavior, most of those reasons existed when I first started dating that individual.
But you closed your eyes, right?
But I did. I was like, no, I don't, like, I can do it.
Like we always do it.
I think so, yeah. I'm just really glad I never did it contractually with anyone. Because, like, some of my breakups have been great. Some of them have been really bad, and I can't imagine having to, like, show up to a lawyer's office with some douchebag that I literally have been, like, fantasizing about burning all of his clothes all day. Like, no, I'm super glad I never did that. And I don't know that it's negatively impacted me like that. I think not having proper role models for good relationships probably impacted me deeper. And I don't think that was my grandmother saying that. I think that was the generation that she was in did not give her any other option but marriage.
Yeah, same for my grandmas.
And in my generation, there's a lot of options, and marriage has just never seemed to be the most attractive one. But granted, Trump's president now, and I would love to leave the country.
So
I do believe in marriage for immigration, by the way. Hi, big fan. Avoid fascism.
So how about your mother's generation? You said grandma's generation.
Yeah, my
marriage
mom.
only option for us. Lots of options, especially for you.
My mom was so 1980s. She got married the first time at 19, divorced by 21. Got married the second time at 22, divorced by 24. And then got pregnant with me by a married man. Yeah?
Wow.
I am the reason for the end of my father's first marriage. His wife filed for divorce about a month after he was served with child support papers.
Oh, wow.
So I'm gonna guess maybe he didn't know. Or she didn't know.
She did not know.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess she didn't maybe know. But I watched my mom struggle with the idea that my father wouldn't marry her and didn't want anything to do with her. And how weak that made her in her generation, in herself, in her beliefs about herself.
So she was in love with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they had a really short, mostly physical affair, but I think that she was definitely attached pretty quick.
Not about him? Not him?
No. His excuse is that he was coming over to Central Washington to go skiing on the weekends.
For him, it was an affair.
Absolutely. It was I know this girl over in a different area code away from my wife, and like I'll hit her up and we'll mess around, and then I'll not call her for a couple months.
Did she remarry?
Not after that. She did almost immediately though end up in several other relationships, and for the most of my childhood she was dating her college professor, who definitely was as old as her mom. Not as old as her dad, but as old as her mom. And my mother ruined gold digging and older men for me. Like, just ruined it, Because, again, she was super dependent upon her boyfriend. They never married, but she lived with him. He paid all of her bills. He took care of her. She was super dependent upon him, and her life and its quality went downhill so fast after she left him. That, again, I think that really taught me that, like, dependence could lead to my ruin, that it wasn't safe. That, like, dependence on a man isn't safe in this culture. No matter how much somebody tells you that is the safe house, it's never felt safe to me.
This I feel answers my last question. We had one before, but like, what would you advise to young women? Like, depend on yourself. Get to the
Yeah.
place when you depend on yourself.
Like, if you're middle
That's good.
class and somehow it does economically make sense for you to get married, because realistically you do have to be in the middle class for that whole, like, we're married and our taxes work better, for it to work better. um I suppose I could handle someone telling me that. I don't know that many people are religious enough to really go through, like, marriage as a concept now. So I think having a relationship is, like, being married isn't going to make that relationship better.
No.
I think is probably the advice that I would say is, so don't use it as the safeguard, right? Because it's not really safe. Dependence isn't safe.
No.
Keep your money separate, right? And don't engage in
Keep your money separate. Interesting.
Absolutely, right? Because
absolutely,
dependence happens or disagreements happen. A huge reason for marriages ending, aside from divorce, is money issues, right? So clearly being able to show, like, who's doing what and who is putting in the work in the relationship, I think is important, and I think both partners should be praised for it. But that would be my advice, is, like, really take care of yourself first. And if that person adds to your situation legitimately or contractually, okay, fine. But if not, like, there are a myriad of ways in today's society to partner with a human, love them, enjoy them, without having to engage in something that may be to your deficit.
Yeah, there's no point.
Not really. I mean, it can be a really costly situation getting divorced, for a lot of individuals. I know that it definitely changes things up when you have children involved in a marriage, because then you have this whole other, like, step to a divorce with custody and custodial issues. It's going to be really interesting to see how politics go now with the idea of divorce being subject on the docket to be discussed. It's like no reason divorce or something like that is really being, I forget what the actual term is being looked at right now, where people would have to start coming up and proving legitimate reasons to be divorced. And that type of ruling is really scary for women, seeing is that, like, marital rape was only outlawed in all states in the U.S. in 1993. And it was more that, like, if you raped a stranger, you would go to prison for a really long time. If you raped your wife, it was a lesser crime. You wouldn't end up necessarily in criminal court, because you were in family court. And abuse, including sexual abuse, not looked at criminally in a family court. Like, so those legalities really hang me up. Just like, oh, so once again, being a miss safer than being a Mrs. apparently, in regards to sexual violence. Actually, violence in general. The most common perpetrator against violence against women are their partners.
Their partners.
I wish, I'm not making it up, I wish I were. I wish it wasn't the case. And then that even increases once she becomes pregnant. Once a woman becomes pregnant, like, her risk of being assaulted by her partner goes way, way up. And it's just, that's really disheartening. And it makes me question why anyone would
exactly
would just, like, willy-nilly just be like, I want to get married, I want to have babies, just because what? Like, we don't live in a hyper-religious society anymore.
Why would we even want to be in relationship with this kind of people who harm us? But I think biology and the attraction is too strong.
Right, because I don't think sexuality is a choice, because I'm still fucking men. Right? Like, I tried to be gay and I couldn't give up men. And, like, that's how I know it's not a choice.
Yeah, otherwise we would extinct a long time ago,
yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Forced to be the part of the relationships where we have to give birth to children, and also if we would not fall in love or be sexually attracted and driven really strongly. So it's just biology, nature, the patriarchy, the society, the system.
And they estimate that
And
as many women in history have died due to childbirth as men have due to war. You know? I mean, so legitimately, like, some of our number one reasons for death in life were, like, marriage and babies. And yet, like, we're still asked, like, you don't want to get married and have babies?
do you know what? Well, the thing is, but men, hardship. They go to war. I guess we go to war too when we get married.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
absolutely. And I wish I could quote it right now.
This does not have to be war. Like,
It shouldn't be. And I don't. And again, that kind of like gives this idea that there's like women out there and us standing up for our rights is some sort of aggression against men. No, I don't think it's that. I think there is just one, women should have rights, and two, there's aggression against men who would be aggressive with us. There's this kind of like hope that maybe we could flip the script a little bit if we're loud enough or aggressive enough. I don't know that that's gonna work. But something's got to give. You know, we're regressing currently in this country as far as women's rights.
Unfortunately, we would never think, or anyone in the world, that we would be here in the 21st century.
Yeah.
In this country, even worldwide. Like, I would never imagine this in my wild, dark thoughts that we would be in this situation as women.
You would not imagine that a majority of Catholic countries are more progressive in their reproductive rights than we are right now. Like, that's... Wow. Because, I mean, they've kind of been the whole, like, anti-birth control, pro-birth fucking organization for thousands of years. And yet those countries, dominated Catholic, still treating their women better, at least while they're pregnant, than we are right now. We have a huge mortality rate for women who are pregnant. And we'll see here in the next year what those rates really look like with Roe versus Wade being overturned, how that's affected. And my guess will be is that the death rate has risen considerably.
So maybe we can finish this on a little bit positive note, if it's possible. Such thing exists today's communities. So the fourth question, okay, what should we concentrate on? We don't want a marriage. Some part of this society, no more marriage, or even relationships don't look very attractive right now. Or if we have to do these things, or even if we love getting married, we still dream about this white dress and being with one person forever. Why not? Maybe it's someone's dream or someone's culture, fine. But these days, this does not have to be the main point in one's
Yeah, it doesn't
life.
have to be the
There are
pinnacle of your
other
existence.
things. First time in the history in the United States, there are as many or more educated women, college-educated women than men. So we have many other opportunities, many other things to do, to enjoy, to concentrate. So, like, what would be the things? Education.
Absolutely.
Professional education.
And we've actually seen marriage rates go down since women were allowed into generally more sex of education. Because for a time we allowed women to have educations, but we were very limited about what they could be educated in. Right? And then as that expanded, we started seeing women get married less and less and less. And I do think that that's because they're like, oh, I don't have to be trapped at home having babies. I can be a human. I can lay on my back, look up at the sky, blow out those dandelion seeds, and wish to be a doctor or an astronaut or whatever. And I think I want that for all humans. I don't think it should ever be limited to what your reproductive function is. It certainly isn't that way for men. Men certainly, in majority, do not walk around their entire lives being defined by the idea of their female counterpart and their children.
No.
They are self-described by their careers, by their own achievements, by their own talents. And I would encourage that for women. I would just say, look at the same type of focus that men give themselves and give that to yourself, your education, your talents, your time, your money.
Definitely. So I see like education these days is not that valued and popular. It's expensive. It's demonized somewhat, but for women, it's absolutely a must. I still respect education. I think it's still the most important and the best thing we can do in our lives. But especially for women, it's very, very, very important because it gives women more freedom.
Uh-huh.
Gives more freedom.
Well,
So
I mean,
it's
authoritarians
necessary.
in general tend, like, the first two things they really go against are, like, your press and the education establishment, right? Like, you think of any time totalitarian or authoritarian government moves have happened in societies, like, the educated elites are always the devils. They're the communists, or they're the this, or they're the that. And so, like, the demonization of education, I just think is part of the political movement that's happening in our atmosphere right now. I don't know that it's really real. Because when we started talking about giving aid to student loan relief and things like that, people were really excited. And I know that a lot of people cite that they just couldn't afford to have gotten the education that they wanted. And I think that that sparked, well, if the education establishment's too good for me, then I'm too good for the educational establishment. And that just, that's really scary, because an uneducated society, and I'm not saying education makes someone smart, but a dumb society, like, scares the shit out of me.
Yes, very scary.
Like, you know, I mean, let's keep up our literacy rates.
Okay. Thank you, Lydia.
Well, thank you, Leah.
This was fantastic.
Yeah, let's do it again.
I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.